What's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I am bringing you my July 2019 wrap-up. So I had some really big ambitions for this month, but unfortunately I did not get through all the books I wanted to. I kind of got stuck with one of the books that was on my TBR for this month, and then that kind of just led to me not really getting through much of the other books that I had planned on. All in all, the month was not too bad. I got through like 7 books with only 1 DNF, so that's not too bad. And the DNF wasn't even because it was bad, it was because I basically had run out of time to read it. Without further ado though, let me get into the stats for this past month. So, recorded in my bullet journal, this month I read, like I said, 7 books but had 1 DNF, so I really finished 6 books this month. And that was a total of 2,730 pages. I also listened to 7 hours and 32 minutes worth of audiobooks. 3 of the books I finished this month were physical copies, 2 were ebooks, 1 was an audiobook, 2 of them were from my personal library, 2 were sent to me or were ARCs, and 2 of them were borrowed books from either Overdrive or the library. So before I get into exactly what books I read, pretty much all of these books that I did read over the course of this month were for specifically the Book Junkie Trials. I had a TBR set for both the Book Junkie Trials and the Biannual Bibliothon, but I really didn't have any time to get to the Biannual Bibliothon this year. But 5 out of these 6 books were basically for the Book Junkie Trials. The 6th one was also technically for the Book Junkie Trials, but I didn't count it because I just didn't think to actually count it towards any of my pages, but that's fine. It was still my audiobook for the month anyway, so it didn't really matter to me that much. But without further ado, let me get into the actual books I read. The first one completed the Orc Grove Challenge, which was my first stop along my Magi Book Junkie Trials road that I had to go on. Essentially, in the Book Junkie Trials, when you're part of a team, you have a specific set of challenges you have to complete in a specific order, and the first one was Orc Grove, which was to read a gruesome, gritty, or gory novel. And the one that I picked for this was All We Knew But Couldn't Say by Joanne Vanicola. This is a memoir dictating Canadian actress Joanne Vanicola's life growing up, being physically abused by her father and sexually and mentally abused and groomed by her mother to become this kind of perfect vision of what the mother could never be, essentially. And this story pretty much delves into some very, very dark topics like physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. There's also a lot of drug and alcohol content. There's eating disorder content. This book is just chock full of misery that Joanne Vanicola had gone through growing up, and essentially tells her tale of when, you know, of growing up as an actress and a performer, and how a lot of the things that she dealt with as a child really impacted her life in very negative ways, but there were some important moments that actually end up being better. And the story is kind of split up between 2 different time periods. You have essentially her telling the story from when she's a child to when she grows up, but then there are bits and pieces of the story where it is about the early 2000s and her mother is essentially dying, and so she and her sisters, who have been estranged for many years, come together to finally say goodbye to their mother, who essentially pretty much destroyed all of their lives, and yet they still go to see her on her deathbed to hopefully understand why that she did a lot of these things that were so evil and vile to them. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars though, because I felt like it was very, very true to what Joanne must have gone through. I don't know Joanne Vanicola specifically. I had never heard of her before reading this, but apparently she kind of knew Keanu Reeves at some point because they kind of crossed paths as they were both performers growing up. And unfortunately, like, I couldn't speak to whether or not this was actually true or any of it, but I don't see why she would want to lie about that kind of stuff. But what she talked about and what she wrote about truly, I think, got me in the way that a memoir is supposed to, where it makes you understand kind of how detrimental some things can be to an individual, and you're happy for them that they've come out the other side of it in a way. So I found it very, very, very hard to read, but a very, very good read. The second book that I completed this month was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This is the 3rd book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. This was the one that took me the longest time throughout the month and was the one that I was struggling with. But I will say that this book is now my favorite of the entire series at this point to where I have read. This counted for the Old Pirate Road prompt, which was to read a story that was placed at sea. There were a lot of points in the story that were placed at sea at points where they were on ships or people were, you know, battling on the water, things of that nature. So there were a lot of spots where that was applicable. This is probably, like I said, my favorite book of the series so far because of one particular thing that I think happened over the course of the story. If you guys watch my reading vlogs over the last month, you would know that this book pretty much just made everything make sense to me. For some reason, the first two books of the Song of Ice and Fire series I enjoyed, but I felt that I was very confused a lot of the time because I thought that with all the different perspectives that were going on, all the different things, especially in A Clash of Kings that were happening, I just felt very confused as to where everybody was and what exactly was going on. For some reason, from the very beginning of A Storm of Swords, everything clicked for me. I understood where people were going. I understood where they'd been. I understood, you know, how they got to the points that they were in this book, and I really understood the entire story from beginning to end. Like, I wasn't confused. I wasn't, you know, trailing off into the distance with no guide as to where I'm going kind of thing, where the first two books of the series kind of made me feel that way. And I just felt like in this story in particular, you truly see how so many of these characters have grown and how so many of these characters may not have grown. Like, you really see the variance in these characters based on what they've gone through, and you really start to understand everything that's happening in the world, all the different things that are happening within this world, at the Wall, in King's Landing, in Dragonstone, everywhere. Like, you really start to understand how everything is playing together and how things are starting to connect, and I really loved that with this book. I feel like I finally understood everything. The next book I completed was Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. This is the first book in a debut series for Elizabeth Lim, and my god, I loved it. This book and A Storm of Swords were both 5 stars for me. Spin the Dawn was my pick for the Glimmer Challenge, which was to have a book that either had a beautiful or colorful cover, and I adored this cover when I first saw it. I thought it was so beautiful with those kind of like periwinkle blues in there and little bits of gold, and I really loved the idea of the story in general, which was basically taking Mulan and combining it with the TV show Project Runway. But let me tell you, this book is so much more than that. You go into this novel thinking that it is solely about a competition that the main character Maya is getting into, and thankfully that is not the only thing that is going on in this world. That entire competition probably takes place in the first third of the book, and then the rest is a completely different story that really sets the tone for exactly how this world is set up, what people are hiding, and what is exactly at stake for this world if Maya does not do what she is supposed to do in this story. And it is wonderful. I loved it. There was a wonderful slow burn romance throughout the story that I really loved. I felt was genuine. I felt it was truly romantic, and the main guy that was the love interest was really complex and really deep, and I truly loved him and loved him more and more as the story grew, because it kind of was like a dislike to love relationship, and I so enjoyed those kinds of stories that I was just rooting for them the whole time, and then you see the story develop and they just become closer and closer. The next book I finished was A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin, the 4th book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. Surprisingly, this one was not as good as A Storm of Swords, and let me explain why. So typically in the Song of Ice and Fire stories, we have multiple perspectives, and in each book you start to get different perspectives than the book before. Either characters have died, or there are new characters coming up that have some kind of a purpose. This one though had perspectives that didn't necessarily work for me in the story. I didn't understand why they were there. Also, there were perspectives of the story that were completely taken out because apparently, according to what George R.R. Martin says in a passage in the back of this book, if he was to have taken all of the perspectives he wanted to include within this novel, it would have been probably 3 times its size, which this is almost 1,000 pages by itself. I would likely guess that if all of the perspectives were given their full stories in this novel, it could easily be almost a 4,000 page book. So what Martin decided to do was that he decided to take half of the perspectives and give them their full story in this installment, and then take the other half and give them their full stories in the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons, which I found to actually be pretty smart. I really like that idea. but I just so really missed some of these perspectives that I had seen in the other books that I really wanted. And unfortunately, the ones that I feel like he kept in this story, many of the new ones, I didn't understand the point of them. I didn't understand why they were perspectives at all in the story, because I didn't really see a point to them at all. Like, there was probably like 2 characters in this story that I was like, why are these even involved? They're not really doing anything to the story. But in hindsight, I've realized that they really just help with building the world and understanding the different kinds of places that are being affected by the things that are happening in the story, and what are the kind of mentalities of the people as they are witnessing these things happen. Just in general, the story kind of let me down in some ways, and I just didn't feel like it was as good as A Storm of Swords. So I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars because I still enjoyed it. I still really thought it was a great book, but it just didn't match up to what I think A Storm of Swords had left for me. This one counted for the Draconic Isles prompt, which was to read a book featuring dragons. The dragons necessarily didn't show up in this story, but they were talked about extensively throughout the book. Like, there were many points in the book where the dragons were discussed and whether or not they were real or not, and so kind of counts. The next book I completed was the group book for the Book Junkie Trials, which was Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This one was kind of a letdown, and it wasn't so much, I think, the writing style, which I feel like a lot of people have a problem with when it comes to Neil Gaiman. I just, for some reason, wasn't so wowed by the story. Like, it was a good story, don't get me wrong. I really, really liked it. I enjoyed reading it and everything, and I felt like it was very fun and quick to read. I got through it in an entire day because it was a very short book, and for some reason, though, I got to the end of it and I was kind of like, okay. You know, like, I wasn't wowed by anything in particular. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. The next book, unfortunately, I did DNF, and that was Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I had picked this because it was the group book for the final biannual Bibliothon run, and I decided to read it at the end of the month because I still really wanted to read it. I was very interested in it, and unfortunately, I had to DNF it, not because of any of the content. It wasn't bad at all. I was actually really enjoying it, but because of my August TBR needing to start exactly on the 1st in order to get through all of the books I wanted to in August, I had to put the book down at the end of the 31st because I was not going to have any time to get back to it. But my hope is that hopefully in the end of the month or maybe in September I can get the book again and be able to actually finish the book. I got to like page 180 something, and I was really enjoying it. Like I said, I thought it was very fun. I just didn't have the time, unfortunately. The final book, though, that I did finish was my audiobook for the month, which was Crazy House by James Patterson and Gabrielle Charbonnet. This is a young adult dystopia, science fiction-y story, but holy crap, this was a very, very dark book. Like, this is filled with things like torture. This story follows 2 sisters who are twins. One of them is unfortunately kidnapped, and the other is trying to figure out what exactly happens to her, and you follow both perspectives as they kind of find out the inner workings of their world that is kind of run in a very, very dystopia-like way than what we see now. And they find out a lot of things about the place that they live that they didn't know before, and they start to begin to question everything that they basically know. And you see things as they happen in this prison where one twin is being sent to, and you see things kind of unravel in the town that the other twin is still in as she's trying to find her sister. Again, like I said, it's very, very dark. There is a lot that is dealt with abuse because one of the twins is severely, severely beaten many times in the book, and there are just some very, very dark elements in terms of what happens in this prison, and I really liked it despite that because I understood the amount of violence that had to be done within the story because it was meant to show that this prison is ruthless and it is absolutely dangerous and like pretty much deadly. Like, the only way that you get out of this prison is the way that these people are told is if you die. Yeah, that's basically how dark this place is, and I loved it. It was so atmospheric. It was really, really interesting. The story was good. The kind of inklings that you got throughout the story about how even the society that these twins live in is very dark and very dangerous was interesting, and the twist at the end was actually really good because I thought the story was going to go in a way where, you know, you would expect with most dystopia stories, but it kind of tailored in a little bit of a different direction, and I was really surprised with that because I thought that that was so clever, especially since a lot of times dystopia kind of has the same kind of ending. This one kind of tailored off in a slightly different way that I was really, really impressed with, because I think that it definitely led to the possibility of a second book, which actually the second book did come out in April of this year. I just really, really liked this story a lot. I loved the twins. They were very similar but very different at the same time, and I think that they really grew as individuals throughout this entire difficult time that they had gone through, and it was just very, very enjoyable to read. But those are all the books that I ended up reading in the month of July. Crazy House was kind of a book that I had picked for the Book Junkie Trials, but I didn't really count it in with my TBR after I had finished my main quest because I just didn't really remember to put it in. But it was supposed to be one of my challenges. I just don't remember which one at the moment. But yeah, so anyway, let me know what you guys did in July. Did you partake in the Buying the Bibliothon or the Book Junkie Trials? How did you do in those? Did you do well? Did you not? How many books did you read in the past month? What did you read? And as always, if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!